Oh my God, Rockfin. Okay. It's about time. Woohoo.
Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
Hey guys, happy Monday. Welcome. I hope you had a great weekend. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Tuesday, Thursday, and Fridays. And you can catch me here Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And excuse me just a second. There is something. Stay. Sorry, that was my other light. I saw it like in the, I'm like, why are you? Oh no, that messed up me. Stay. Okay. Anywho, shout out to all of you watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Twitter. We got a good show tonight, guys. I hope you're really pumped. We're going to learn some things here tonight. We're going to get a little deep into it. Really quick, I want to give shout outs to people in the chat. So let's get going. What's going on, Dabby Dabs? Whoop, whoop. It's almost Sabby time. What's up, Sabby fam? Don't forget to show the like button some love. Go ahead and hit that like button, guys. What's going on? Hannah G says these Twitter files are something else. I agree. We're going to talk about part 3 tonight. Shout out to Rodrigo. We still need a Sabby interview with Ralph Nader would break the lefty internet. I have been working on that for a long time, Rodrigo. I'm still trying to find a way to get in touch with him. So trust, you guys will be the first to know if that happens. What's going on, Seoul? All transit is paid for by all taxpayers. It should be free. Shout out to Cactus Man. Hicking should be legal. I don't know what that's about. Greetings, Angela, who's a Sabby member, says good evening. And yes, public transportation should be free. One of the only things during the pandemic that was actually helping working people out here where I live was free buses for 2 years. We're going to get into that tonight, you guys. If you haven't had a chance to do so, go ahead and take that poll that's pinned to the live chat about public transit, whether or not you think it should be free. What's going on? Monarch says, fudge, Elon Musk and Dave Shappy. It be like Kanye West praising Trump back when Trump was president, who invited Kanye to the White House. Oh, boy. What's going on, Larez? Hello, Sabby, Eric, and Sabby family. I hope everybody had a great weekend. Hit the like, hit the thumbs, son. Hit the thumbs. Hit the thumbs, son. Hit the thumbs. What's going on? Gamer says hello. Shout out to Sean says, yeah. What is going on? Wary? Hey, everybody. Shout out to Myra's mama. Hey, all. Y'all love. Shout out to Hugo, who's a Sabby member, says Scooby Dooby Doo. Greetings, Eric, who's also a Sabby member, says, hey, hi, all. What's going on, Lawrence, who's also a Sabby member, says, hiya, Sabby Sabs, Dooby Dooby Doo. Greetings, Bling Girl. Shout out to Andrew, says, hello, everyone. Don't be jealous of my profile pic with Rome. All right. What's going on, Andrew? You got to meet Rome. That's awesome. Awesome. Greetings, aggravated progressive, says stay light. Shout out to Dr. Scott, says sup fam. Roger Meadows is in the house. Sabrina, regarding transit, have we been mind melding, or are you just reading my tweets that I'll tweet out, then forget I tweeted? I don't know if we're mind melding, but I got a story for you tonight. I got a story for you. Shout out to Carrie, says Sabby looking extra lovely today. Thank you. Thanks. I try sometimes. I try. Greetings, Colin, says 13 days until Christmas. And thank you for that reminder, Colin. I have not started Christmas shopping yet. I do this every year. Every time I say next year is going to be different, it never is. Welcome to my world. I don't know what to get people, man. I don't know what to get them. It's just like my parents, I think, is the hardest because I feel like they have everything. Like what am I going to get them this year? You know, it's like, I don't know. I don't know, man. I am the gift card person. I'm that person that likes to give people gift cards. So I'm the one that people will point at and say, you shouldn't give someone a gift card for a gift because it's not personable. This is true, but I don't know what to get you. Sorry. What's going on properly? Smug says MTA is different. Okay. What are we talking about tonight? Really quick, let's go ahead and shout out everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. You really do keep the light on around here. You really do, like seriously. Shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. If you're interested in being a patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course, the ultimate. You can find all of their names listed here, and you can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. And I want to give a special shout out to a new Sabby patron. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for Erica Robb. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate all of your support. For reals. Okay, let's go ahead and share my thumbnail here so we can get into tonight's stories. Like I said, tonight's going to be an interesting show because of the stories that we're going to discuss tonight. So tonight we are discussing Matt Taibbi Twitter part 3. That's right. Those Twitter files are still cranking out. I think they just released part 5. I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep up with all these, to be honest with you, because I'm not live every night, but we'll get there. We'll get there. I'm also going to discuss Kirsten Sinema speaks out. So we all know that Kirsten Sinema has decided to leave the Democratic Party, but she had a recent interview that we're going to dive into tonight. We're actually going to do a mini case study tonight of Kirsten Sinema because I have some things to say. Got some things to say there. We're also going to discuss Maxwell Frost is denied. What happened to Maxwell Frost and how does this affect thousands and thousands of people across the United States every day? And last but not least, we are going to discuss DC public transit proposal. What is happening in Washington, D.C.? And if you live there or you're in the D.C. area, you're going to want to pay attention to this. So let's go ahead and get into that story. Now, for those of you who are new, you may not be aware of this, but I would like to consider myself to be a champion of public transportation. Now, what does that mean? That means that I have ridden multiple transit systems in this country. Whether it was NYC, whether it's been Boston, whether it's even been the bus system in Atlanta, the whatever you call it in Columbia, South Carolina, the transit system in DC, Baltimore. Look, I've done it. I've done it. There are many things to critique. There are positives depending on where you live. But one of the issues that still remains is the cost of public transportation. Washington, D.C. is looking to tackle that. Take a look at this. Now, this came out the other day. Free Ride. DC unveils a bold plan to boost public transportation. I'm not making this up. Let's go ahead and get into it. Coming straight out of DC, The pandemic laid bare for the District of Columbia and other major cities that public transit was a lifeline for essential workers, that even modest fares could be a burden to them. So the nation's capital is introducing a groundbreaking plan. It will begin offering free bus fares to residents next summer. Free bus fares to residents next summer. Now, I do want to chime in here for a second and just add DC would not be the first to implement this. Baltimore actually has a free transit system. It's called the Charm Ride. Now, that system in particular focuses on the downtown portion of Baltimore. So the last time I went back to visit family there, I noticed that and I was like, wow, Baltimore has like a free transit system now, again, just for the downtown area. But for those people who work in that area or may live in that area, or if you're just going downtown or whatever, it's pretty convenient and it's free. And I remember thinking to myself when I saw that a couple of years ago, well, if Baltimore can do this, could other cities do this too? This idea has also come up in Boston, which is where I live in the Boston area. Now, the transit system here is a complete mess. I've talked about it on this show multiple times. There's a lot of things that need to improve. But one of the complaints that people have had, aside from the repairs and the maintenance of the trains and the fact that our transportation system in Boston, the MBTA, does not run 24 hours like the one in New York City, is also the fact that people feel that it's too expensive. They feel like the prices continue to increase every year and the service has not improved. And they have a point. So DC, this could be a winner for DC. Starting off with some good news tonight. Other cities, including LA, Kansas City, Missouri, suspended fare collection during the height of the pandemic to minimize human contact and ensure, make this a little bigger. Where did we go? And ensure that residents with no other travel options could reach jobs and services at hospitals, grocery stores, and offices. But DC's permanent free fare plan will be by far the biggest, coming at a time when major cities, including Boston and Denver, and states such as Connecticut, are considering broader zero fare policies to improve equity and help regain ridership that was lost with the rise of remote and hybrid work. This also is going to help cut back on commuting via car. And I think this is really important, especially for people who don't have a car, but they may not be able to afford like bus fare every day. This would be really great for people. It takes more cars off the road. You don't have to deal with as much. Hopefully, it will cut back on some of the traffic that DC has. But honestly, I'm looking at the affordability factor here. I think this is going to benefit people, especially people who are working class and people who are poor as well. Now, it goes on to say Los Angeles instituted free fares in 2020 before recently resuming charging riders. Lately, LA Metro has been testing a fare capping plan under which transit riders pay for trips until they hit a fixed dollar amount, and then it's free after that. Though new Mayor Karen Bass has suggested support for permanently abolishing the fares. Analysts say DC's free fare system offers a good test case on how public transit can reshape for a post-pandemic future. If DC demonstrates that it increases ridership, it reduces the cost burden for people who are lower income, and it improves the quality of transit service in terms of speed of bus service and reduces cars on the road, this could be a roaring success. In a time in this country where gas was pretty expensive this year because of inflation, something like this would be really beneficial. And I thought about this a couple of months ago as well, where I did notice that where people were complaining that they didn't even know if they were going to have enough money to put gas in their car just to get to work because the gas prices were so expensive. particularly up here where I live. So I definitely understand. That being said, imagine if we had free public transportation all across the country during that time when the gas prices were so expensive. This is something that people could have taken advantage of and not have to worry about how they're going to pay for gas just to get to and from work. And if you live in this DC metro area, you know how congested the traffic can be. You have people coming from Maryland and Virginia, different parts of Maryland and Virginia driving into DC. Plus, you have people that live in DC that are driving, not taking the public transportation. So hopefully this will help with traffic as well. Like I said, if you have never been there, go there once and you'll see what I mean. Something like this would be really great here in Boston too. I think that if they did implement free public transit, I think more people would be inclined to take public transportation here. Now, they still would have to improve the service, but I kind of get it. Why would you want to pay all this money to take public transportation that doesn't show up half the time, doesn't get you to work on time, or breaks down at Harvard Square Station? I told you, I am a transit rider. I'm familiar with all of it. I've dealt with all of it. So I get it. It goes on to say the $2 fares will be waived for riders boarding metro buses within the city limits beginning around July 1st. In a unanimously approving the plan last week, the DC Council also agreed to expand bus service to 24 hours on 12 major routes downtown, benefiting nightlife and service workers who typically had to rely on costly rideshare to get home after the metro, subway, and bus system closed at night. We have this problem in Boston as well. And this is something I never really understood. We would go out on the weekends, we'd go clubbing or go to the bars. And the bars here would do last call like 1 o'clock in the morning. And they close at like 2. Every now and then you may be able to find some kind of backdoor secret place that may be willing to stay open a little bit later, but shh, you're not supposed to know about that. Anywho, I would always wonder, what about the servers and the bartenders? How are they getting home? Because a lot of people that live in Boston don't own a car. It's expensive to own a car in Boston. You got to pay for parking. So there's all of that. And what I found later on is that a lot of the servers and bartenders, they were taking cabs home from work, or they were hoping to take like an Uber or a Lyft when that came about here in the city as well. And that can become really expensive. So you made all that money in tips that night, but now you have to spend at least like $30 just to get home, depending on where you're commuting from. So that's another thing as well. A new $10 million fund devoted to annual investments in DC bus lanes, shelters, and other improvements was also approved to make ride faster and more reliable. The district is ready to be a national leader in the future of public transit. This is amazing. Roughly 85% of bus riders are DC residents. The metro system also serves neighboring suburbs in Maryland and Virginia. And that's what I was telling you guys about. About 68% of DC residents who take the bus have household incomes below $50,000. And riders are disproportionately Black and Latino compared to metro rail passengers, according to the council's budget analysis. This is also not unusual when it comes to bus riders. I've noticed the same thing living here in Boston. Typically, most of the people that are riding the buses tend to be African-American, Latino community, and most of the people that are taking like the commuter rail, here it's called the commuter rail. If you're commuting, you have a commuter rail pass. It goes out to the suburban areas and other towns in Eastern Massachusetts. It's expensive. Some people, their employer may cover a portion of it. Some people's employer does not. But typically what you will see if you get on the commuter rail, you don't see as many African Americans on the commuter rail. It is expensive. The bus is the cheaper option. And then also there's the factor that depending on what neighborhood you live in, you may not even have access to the subway or the commuter rail. Typically in Boston, once you get into the predominantly African American neighborhoods, there's very few subway access. compared to the communities in Boston that we would call Boston proper, which are heavily more Caucasian, so to speak. So this would help a lot of people. And I really hope they get this going next year. Now, here's the con. Not everyone is a fan. Peter Van Doren, a senior fellow at the DC-based Cato Institute, said the plan risks high costs and mixed results, noting that the opportunity to improve ridership may be limited because bus passengers have been quicker to return to near pre-pandemic levels. He said government subsidies to help lower income people buy cars would go farther because not everyone has easy access to public transit. But in a city like DC, you would think they would be focusing on climate change as well in this country. So giving people more cars, I don't think is the answer. We want to remove cars from the roads. We want less cars on the roads. We don't want more cars on the road. So I don't get that. I don't get that at all. He goes on to say the beauty of automobiles is they can go anywhere and everywhere in a way that transit does not. We don't know the subset of low income people in DC where transit is a wonderful option as opposed to a not such a wonderful option. If they don't know that, then my suggestion is then get to know those people, go to those communities and find out what public transportation access is like for people there. You have to get outside. You have to leave your office and talk to people in those communities. You can't just sit back and say, well, we don't know what the transit situation is like for people in all the communities. Go to those communities and find out. If you're expecting the people to come to you, you're in the wrong. Sometimes you have to meet people where they are. So that's my response to that. And also this portion here where he says automobiles can go anywhere. Yeah, but you still have to pay for parking. That's the problem. It's not like you have a car, you work in downtown DC, you're just going to drive downtown and you park for free. You got to pay to park. So there's an added cost that goes along with that as well. The council's move, which will be finalized in a second vote later this month, came over the concerns of DC Mayor Mario Bowser, who supports the concept of free fares, but raises questions about the 42 million annual costs over the long term. DC residents and taxpayers will have to pay for this program. Why do the taxpayers have to pay for the program? DC, similar to Boston, population wise, we have about the same number of people. And so I'm pretty sure DC gets a lot of money. I'm pretty sure they can use the money a lot of money comes into DC. Don't even play me like that. They can pay for this themselves. They shouldn't have to tax the taxpayers for this. Our neighbors, Virginia and Maryland, should absorb some of these costs as their residents will benefit from this program as well. You know, this is exactly why, I'm sorry, I have to point this out, Virginia and Maryland. My family is from Baltimore, Maryland. I'm very familiar with the DC area. And I have to tell you, this is one of the reasons why I don't live in DC. The whole Virginia, Maryland thing, it just... Trying to put this nicely. It's just the problem that you run into. And if you live in the DC area in the chat, let me know. The problem that you run into living in DC is that, let's say you have friends that are coworkers, right? You met them as coworkers, they became friends, that kind of thing. You guys see each other at work. When it comes time to hang out with people on the weekend or in the evening, it becomes difficult because some of them live in Virginia, some of them live in Maryland, and then you may live right in DC. And then they have to deal with the commute coming in. Sometimes it's not even worth it. I'm just being honest. Like sometimes, like it could take you an hour, 2 hours, depending on how bad the traffic is on the Beltway, just trying to get into DC if you're coming from Virginia or if you're coming from different parts of Maryland. And on top of that, another thing I want to add is that a lot of these towns outside of DC in Virginia and Maryland, they have their own scene. Like Arlington, Virginia, for example, has its own nightlife. Silver Springs, Maryland has its own nightlife. You don't really have to go into DC to go out. Do you see what I'm saying? So oftentimes what would happen is if you had friends that lived in Virginia or Maryland, asking them to come into DC on the weekend to go out partying with you, it's not necessarily convenient. And then they have to turn around and figure out how they're going to get back home after you guys leave the club. I'm just keeping it real. It's not that convenient. And that's if the metro is still running for them to take that back. If not, they're going to have to drive back home or get an expensive ass Uber. So that's actually why we got a Silver Spring in the house. Vote third party in the duopoly, Silver Spring. What's up? What's up? That's actually why I chose not to live in DC, is because that commuting back and forth, it just I don't like it. Valentine said, I got stuck in DC traffic for 8 hours one time. Yeah, it can take you a long time. And like, you never know when you're going to hit that traffic sometimes. Sometimes it can come out of nowhere, but it's kind of inconvenient. Colin says, yep, we joke that going to Virginia, which is 5 miles away, is like traveling to another country. This is very true. That's why, like, it's a hassle. I've talked to my friends that live in Virginia, but they work in DC, and they said it's a pain in the ass if someone says, hey, come to DC this weekend and go to the movies with me. They're like, for them, that could be anywhere between like a 1.5 hour to 2 hour commute just trying to get there. But that's a whole other story. Anywho, let's go back in. Allen has also proposed a $100 monthly transit benefit for DC residents to access the Metro rail system, but shelved the plan until at least fall 2024 due to the $150 million annual estimated cost. He described free bus fare as a win-win for the district because they will help the transit system recover and offer affordable, green-friendly travel while boosting economic activity downtown. It's a long article there. Eric, can you put the link in the chat for people who want to read the rest? Because they go into the deficit, and I'm like, you guys know how I feel about deficits. I'm just like, whatever. But yeah, like that. Hopefully that happens next summer. So that's a little bit of good news for those of you that live in that area. Derek says the best public transit I've seen is in Copenhagen. They let you take bikes on the bus even. That's true. Yeah. The United States still has a long way to go when it comes to public transportation, especially if you compare it to Europe. Like when I lived in Germany, we could just take a train to France. Like you could just hop on the public, and they have the high speed rail. You could just jump on the train and be like, okay, we're going to Spain. Like we don't have that here. She's Black. Transportation needs to be free 24 hours a day in every state. I feel you. Bad cookies. Well, at least with public transportation, I don't have to have Roger Meadows try to convince me to vote ballot initiatives during my Uber ride. Oh, bad cookies. Come on. What's happening here? Thank you for the super chat, Colin. Seems like you have a beef with Harvard Station. Yes. Yes. For those of you who don't know, like Harvard Station here is a part of the red line. So our lines have different colors. We have red, orange, blue, silver. The silver line isn't really that's a whole other story. Anywho, typically what would happen, because I was on the red line, and typically what would happen is that for whatever reason, everything would be going great until we got to Harvard Square Station. And then all of a sudden the train would stop. The doors would open. People would get off at Harvard Square Station. The doors would close, but the train wouldn't move. And so the train would just sit there. And then finally the conductor would come on and say, we have a standby here at Harvard Station. We have a standby here at Harvard Station. Or my favorite one, there's a disabled train up ahead, so we're going to be sitting here for a bit. Every time, never would fail. Thanks for the super chat. Big Cat's Corner. Sabby always killing it. Love the blue cheetah. Oh, thank you. I haven't worn this shirt in a while. And thank you for the super chat, Roger. Automobiles can go anywhere, so can bikes. That's true. That's a good point, Roger. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. Okay. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. I guess this whole thing with RWU, despite its freight regarding trains, got them thinking. If DC is serious, they'd pass a national infrastructure bank due to the lockdown ridership on the NYS owned MTA, which means revenue is down. While we're at it, we need to get rid of Metro cards, easy passes, monthly railroad tickets. Our taxes already pay for them. Public banks are perfect because they specialize in infrastructure. Yeah, that's a good point, Roger Meadows. That's another thing too. Those damn cards, that's another thing that was annoying because, if you lose your Charlie, here's the Charlie card. If you lose your Charlie card, it's not that simple just to get a brand new card. They have the machines in some of the stations where you can get a pass, you can get a Charlie card ticket. But if you had an unlimited Charlie card that was given to you by your employer, which is what most people have here, then you got to go back to work and you got to go to the parking office and tell them you need a new Charlie card. Then you got to wait for them to issue that. And it's such a pain, such a pain. But yeah, that's a lot about public transit, you guys. So if you're in the DC area, I hope you're pumped. That sounds like it's going to be a good win for you guys. Go ahead and smash that like button for me, guys. That really helps me with the algorithm there if you have not done so. And we're going to go ahead into our second story. We're about to get a little deep here because we're about to go into a discussion about housing in this country. Now, if you have not heard, Maxwell Frost, he is a new congressman. He was a progressive congressman. Well, they're calling him a progressive congressman. I told you guys how I feel about him. He did flip-flop with his support with Palestine and the BDS movement and decided not to back them after all. That's not progressive to me. DSA does not stand for that. You're supposed to back the BDS movement. But that's not what we're going to talk about tonight in reference to Maxwell Frost. Because recently, he went through something in reference to a housing situation in DC. Let's start off with his tweet here. So Maxwell Frost tweeted this. He said, I just applied to an apartment in DC where I told the guy that my credit was really bad. He said I'd be fine. Got denied, lost the apartment and the application fee. This ain't meant for people who don't already have money. So we're going to dive into this tonight. I want to start off by saying this. When you get a new job and you move to a city, you're not paid right away. That's just how it is. But you still have to find a place to live. I can tell you how it works here at Boston. Typically here, most of the landlords are going to request 3 months rent paid up front. It may be first, last, and security, or it may be first, last, and the rental deposit. So the rental deposit, sometimes if you're going through a rental company, they also are going to ask you for 1 month up front. It still ends up being 3 months all up front. Boston, that's easily $5,000. Sometimes a little bit more depending on where you're going. So you're already expected to give 3 months rent up front. On top of that, you have to pay an application fee that is usually non-refundable. What's that all about? And on top of that, if you don't get the apartment, you lose the application fee. Sometimes these fees can be anywhere from $25, $50, $75, $100. It all depends. Here's my thing. If you don't get the apartment, why aren't you refunded your application fee? And what do these application fees cover anyway? That was another thing I never understood. So we want to focus on the housing issue in this country because this situation is not just particular to Maxwell Frost. This situation affects a lot of people in this country that don't come from any type of generational wealth. A lot of people that may not be able to get an apartment because they have no credit or they have bad credit. And when I was growing up, my dad said no credit is bad credit. So there you go with that. Some apartment complexes will give you the requirement that you either have to have good credit or you have to find a cosigner. This is another problem. Not everyone can find a cosigner. And see, this is one of those things where I think these are things that you learn as you grow. This is something that is not taught to a lot of kids when they're in high school. I wish it was. Because the reality is, if you don't have good credit and if you can't find a cosigner, then you're screwed. Now, let's get into this story a little bit more because it goes deeper than this, because we're going to have a discussion about credit tonight. So we're going to dive into the article first. First Gen Z congressman-elect says he was denied DC apartment over bad credit. Here we go. The congressman-elect, set to become the first member of Gen Z to serve in Congress, said on Thursday his rental application for an apartment in DC was denied because of his really bad credit. Now, I want to say something here before we go further into this article. This is not an opportunity, or don't make this an opportunity for you to point fingers at Maxwell Frost for having bad credit. That's not what this is about. This is about a system that is designed to keep people where they are. Typically, people who are working class, people who are poor, people who don't come from some type of generational wealth. The way this system is set up, it's designed to prevent you from getting ahead. You have to understand that. So let's go back in. It goes into his tweet there. Frost, an Orlando-based community organizer, made history last month when he won election in Florida's 10th congressional district at just 25 years old. Now, he was replacing Val Demings because Val Demings chose to run against Marco Rubio, and she lost that race. Now, it goes on to say, the congressman-elect expressed frustrations with relocating to the Capitol, saying that he has bad credit because he ran up a lot of debt running for Congress for a year and a half, and that he did not make enough money working for Uber to pay for the cost of living. Frost said that he quit his full-time job during his race's primary because I knew that to win at 25 years old, I need to be a full-time candidate. 7 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day is not sustainable or right, but it's what we had to do. This is not uncommon. By the way, typically, if someone is running for office, they have to quit their job if they're trying to win. As a candidate, you can't give yourself a stipend or anything till the very end of your campaign. So most of the run, you have no money coming in unless you work a second job. In comments to the Washington Post, Frost declined to identify the building and the size of his debt or credit score, which he should not have to. That's really none of your business, CNN. Oh my God. He doesn't have to tell you what his debt and his credit score. If he chooses to, that's okay. But come on. But he said the building where his application was rejected was in the city's Navy Yard neighborhood. I know where that is. Roughly a mile from the U.S. Capitol. he said he lost the $50 application fee. So again, here is someone who financially is not in a good position to begin with, and now they're out of $50, which may not be much to some. Frost is not the only incoming member of Congress to have struggled to find housing in DC. On Twitter, he referenced AOC, who in 2018 became the youngest woman elected to Congress at age 29, and who also had a hard time as an incoming lawmaker finding affordable housing in Washington on her then salary. Frost pointed out that once his congressional salary kicks in, he'll be fine, adding that we have to do better for others. That's right. This is the problem. Most people are not getting a congressional salary. You see what I mean? So typically the way that it works, he's going to start his job technically January, but he's not going to be paid right when he starts his job. Just like any of you, you don't get paid immediately when you start working. It takes time, right, before you get that first paycheck. I also recognize that I'm speaking from a point of privilege because in 2 years' time, my credit will be okay because of my new salary that starts next year. That's another thing. I'm glad he realizes that. But we have to do better for the whole country. Members of the House and the Senate earn $174,000 a year, according to Congressional Research Service. But that salary will not begin until Frost is sworn in on January 3rd. Let's talk about something here really quick. We're going to get into the credit part in a second. When I'm thinking about the way this system is designed, the way it's set up, this really is not set up for working class people to go into Congress. Because if you're working class or you're poor and you win a congressional seat, where are you going to get the money for the down payment for your apartment? Where's that money going to come from? Again, he will not get a salary anytime soon. And I'm starting to think about the fact that if you look at a lot of the congressional members, a lot of them previously were lawyers. A lot of them went to Ivy League schools. A lot of them coming from generational wealth. They have families that can support them. They have families that can back them up and help them out in that time of need. However, if you're coming from a place where maybe you don't even have, your parents are not alive, or maybe your parents are alive, but your parents are in debt and they can't help you, where are you going to get the money to be able to put a down payment on an apartment in Washington, D.C. at this day and age? Because apartments are expensive in D.C., just like they are here in Boston. So you guys see what I'm saying? It's already set up to keep working class and poor people out of those congressional and Senate seats. Think about it. Well, congressional seats. Think about it. How are you going to get in? Where are you going to live? Where are you going to stay? Where are you going to get the money from? So that's something I want you to keep in mind. But this is a problem that's happening all across this country with a lot of millennials and people who are Gen Z. They're finding themselves in these situations. They're graduating from these colleges. They're getting these jobs. But if you're coming from a working class family or a poor family, they are struggling to find a way to come up with the money to pay the rent to live in these cities. Boston, DC, New York, LA, San Francisco, even Austin, Texas now. Even Raleigh, North Carolina now. It shouldn't be this way, but it is this way. Now, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, she was questioned about what happened to Maxwell Frost. I want you to hear what she had to say. Check this out.
Can I just ask you a domestic question? So Maxwell Frost was denied, an apartment or an application because of really bad credit. I know that you've looked at housing inequities and problems facing people of color in terms of getting housing and just fairness in the housing market. This practice of requiring credit applications and then fees that carry a fee seems to be something that's happening all over the country. Is there anything that the White House or that the Biden administration can do to curb what seems to be a predatory practice in some cases, where people are basically, they, in order to even get a chance of getting an apartment in this very tight and difficult housing market, they have to pay money up front?
So the president and the administration understands that Americans are struggling with high cost of housing. That is something that we have seen throughout these past several years. And that's why the president released his housing supply action plan that we have talked about. And it's to ease that burden of housing cost over time by using a mix of administrative and legislative actions to boost the supply of quality housing in every community. Just last month, the White House hosted a range of tenants and tenant advocates for listening sessions along with federal agencies, and we'll have more more conversations like these, and we'll add, to add the topics that you're just laying out. But again, that's why the president took initiative with his plan. I've talked about the different specifics of the plan and how it's going to help folks who feel that burden, because we also understand housing costs, again, is one of the things that has a big effect on people's lives and livelihoods. So this is a priority for this administration.
I don't think she actually answered the question. Let's look at the question.
Can I just ask you a domestic question? So Maxwell Frost was denied, an apartment or an application because of really bad credit. I know that you've looked at housing inequities and problems facing people of color in terms of getting housing and just fairness in the housing market. This practice of requiring credit applications and then fees that carry a fee seems to be something that's happening all over the country. Is there anything that the White House or that the Biden administration can do to curb what seems to be a predatory practice in some cases, where people are basically, they, in order to even get a chance of getting an apartment in this very tight and difficult housing market, they have to pay money up front?
So
she talked about the predatory practices, the credit score, the cost of the housing. Is there anything the Biden administration can do to fix that? That's what she's talking about. Listen to what she says.
Well, the president and the administration understands that Americans are struggling with high cost of housing. That is something that we have seen throughout these past several years. And that's why the president released his housing supply action plan that we have talked about. And it's to ease that burden of housing cost over time by using a mix of administrative and legislative actions to boost the supply of quality housing in every community. Just last month, the White House hosted a range of tenants and tenant advocates for listening sessions along with federal agencies, and we'll have more more conversations like these, and we'll add, to add the topics that you're just laying out. But again,
she's talking about the supply of quality housing. The woman specifically asked her about the predatory practices of the credit score and the cost of housing and the application fee. She's talking about the quality of housing and implementing more housing. She doesn't say anything here about the credit score, which is the trouble that Maxwell Frost ran into. She doesn't say anything here about the application fee. She doesn't really say anything about the predatory practices, which is what the reporter was asking her about. No one is asking you about adding more housing. She goes into the spiel about how, Biden has this plan to come up with some, he's talked to tenants and they're going to work on something and to help this change over time. What's the plan? How are you fixing the housing cost issue? How are you fixing the credit score issue? What about the application fees? Think she's at a loss
That's
for
why the
words.
president took initiative with his plan. I've talked about the different specifics of the plan and how it's going to help folks who feel that burden, because we also understand housing costs, again, is one of the things that has a big effect on people's lives and livelihoods. So this is a priority for this administration.
Doesn't tell you what the plan is. You notice that? What are they going to do about the credit score? Now, you may be wondering, why would the reporter ask her about the predatory practices of housing and mention credit scores? Why would she specifically ask what the Biden administration is going to do about that? I found out something. Because one of the problems that people tend to run into when it comes to credit, now we're getting into the credit portion of this discussion. Bad credit, good credit. Oftentimes you will find in order to rent an apartment, you need to have good credit. That can be considered anything that's under 620 can be considered bad credit, believe it or not. Some places may be higher than that. The question that we need to ask ourselves is this when it comes to the credit system in this country. First and foremost, why is it that there are certain expenses that you may pay for your whole adult life, but they do not impact your credit score? Let's say you've rented for 5 years. You've paid your rent on time for 5 years. Doesn't impact your credit score at all. You paying your rent on time has nothing to do with your credit score unless you get evicted. Why is that? Why aren't people rewarded for that on the credit reporting system? If you have a cell phone bill that you pay every month, you've been doing this for years on time, why isn't that impacted on your credit reporting system? Why is it only impacted if you don't pay and it's sent to collections? Why is that? Think about all the bills that you pay for, whether it's utilities, your phone bill, your rent, car payment will impact that. Why is it all those other bills do not impact your credit score at all unless you stop paying? Because you see, the whole credit reporting system is also designed for working class people and poor people to fail. And I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by that. This is another question we need to start asking ourselves. Why does it take 7 years to establish good credit? Why is it if you have a derogatory mark on your credit report, why is it that even after you pay off that bill, let's say it was medical debt, a lot of people in this country have medical debt, you have a $300 bill from the doctor's office that you could not pay on time. They send it to a collections agency. A couple months later, you actually are able to come up with that money and pay off that bill. But unfortunately, it doesn't matter in reference to your credit report, because on your credit report, even though you paid that bill off, that derogatory mark will remain on your credit report for 7 years. Now, if you paid it off, why isn't it removed? And who came up with that rule? Because you see, I found it pretty interesting when you see where this comes from. Make this a little bit bigger for you guys. Nope, made it too big there. Why it takes 7 years to establish good credit. Listen to this. Let's say you want to improve your credit score, or maybe you don't even have a credit score yet and you want to get one, preferably a good one. How long is it going to take? It takes 7 years. Who came up with that rule? I'm going to show you. Wait for it. Let me make sure I got it here. I'm going to make it bigger because the text is kind of small. I don't know why, but oh, it is there. I'm pushing the wrong thing. Oh, it doesn't let me make it bigger. I'm sorry, guys. The site's wonky, so it doesn't let me make it bigger. But let's see who came up with that rule. Why 7 years? Before the Fair Credit Reporting Act was passed in 1970, the House and the Senate debated a reasonable period of time to wait before removing negative information from credit reports. They settled on 7 years. A length of time already commonly used in the industry. The time frame balanced consumers' need to reestablish good credit and lenders' need to reliable information. The 7 years as a predictive time frame has withstood the test of time when it comes to balancing fairness against safety and soundness concerns. Now, that's coming from Norm, who's the Vice President of Public Affairs for the Consumer Data Industry Association. But to answer that question, who came up with that rule? Ladies and gentlemen, it was the House and the Senate. Now, isn't it kind of strange that you have someone like Maxwell Frost going into the House starting January, in the same house that he's going into, they're the reason why he can't get those derogatory marks off his credit report. Not until it's been 7 years. Guys, when I tell you the system is designed for people to fail, this is exactly what I'm referring to. 7 years. You know what happens in 7 years? A lot of things can happen in 7 years. Why didn't they make some type of exception for people who were able to come back and pay off that charge? If you're able to come back and pay off that charge before that 7 years is up, why is it still remaining on your credit report, thus affecting your credit score, thus preventing you from getting an apartment, a car, etc.? This is the problem. I don't want you to look at this story about Maxwell Frost and just think, oh, poor guy, he had a bad go at it. Because it's not really about Maxwell Frost. It's about the system that is designed for working class and poor people to fail and to keep them where they are, to keep them in the struggle. You have to wait 7 years before the remark is removed or charged off, as they like to put it. And a lot could have happened in your life during that time. You could have gotten a good job, a better paying job. You could have started a family. You could have become more responsible as an adult, but none of that matters according to your credit report. So the system is the problem. It's not just Frost. A lot of Americans have to deal with this shit. A lot of people have to deal with it. Now, it says even here, you have to have 7 years of credit history to have good credit at all. This is exactly what my dad mean when my dad told me in high school, no credit is considered bad credit. So even if you don't have any credit, you don't take out any credit cards, you're like, I don't want to go into debt. I'm not getting credit cards. I'm going to pay cash for everything, or I'll use my debit card for everything, but I don't want to deal with credit cards. So you have no credit. That doesn't help you either. Anthony said, shut the shit down. Exactly. This system is not designed for working class and poor people to win. It's designed to keep you where you are or to drive you out. These are questions we need to start asking people who are our representatives that represent us in Congress. Where's the bill for something like this? Where's the bill to make it so that your rent, your cell phone bill can all count towards your credit? Where's that bill? Where's the bill to remove the 7-year credit history? We have to know the tools that are continuing to oppress people. You can talk about your oppression, you can talk about your struggle, but if you don't know the tools that are keeping you where you are, you'll never fully get out. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. All right. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. When it comes to the federal government, it's not taxes that pays for everything, when in reality, Congress is the currency issue. So they do what they always do, legislate new money into existence to pay for what they want, but never what we want. Notice how they'll never tell you how they pay for Ukraine and Pentagon spending. They do this all the time. Regarding states and municipalities, charter a public bank to create surplus. Thank you so much for that, Roger. And thank you for this tip as well. Banks are given licenses by the federal government to print money, to take deposits, mark it up, and issue lines of credit. That's them printing money. A public bank deposits are taxes which get marked up, then issued out as lines of credit to finance infrastructure projects, creating jobs, generating new income taxes, used to pay back the loan used to create its job, while interest generates surplus, allowing states to draw from new and raising of existing taxes not needed to pay from anything. Speaking of housing, they can take and temper the high-risk speculative practices out of the housing industry. That link I sent last week showed how North Dakota, the only state with a public bank, came in at number 51 in homeless population. They included DC. 2008 did not affect them for the same reason, and North Dakota was lowest in foreclosures. That's right. I've been learning a lot about North Dakota recently. I'm just telling you, I've been learning a lot. Let's go to some of these comments here. Monarch says cosigners are bad. So the bad thing about cosigner is that you are assuming to take on that person's debt if for whatever reason they don't pay. Jay, that's right, Sabby. The system is designed to keep us where we are, working extra for less and paying more than rich people do for everything. That's right. That's right. That's another thing, too. If you have bad credit, you have higher interest rates. She's Black. This is one reason why I say it's easy for some of these lawmakers to sell out. The donors give them offers they can't refuse. SG, yeah, while you run, you are out for work for 2 years. You win or you lose. That's lost wages. And using your savings, that is why only rich people run for office. That's right, SG. That's so true. D. Henry Milner, capitalism can't fix capitalist problems. 100%. Sula, they're going to use public housing funds to build more luxury condos. Yeah, they're already doing that here in Boston. She's Black. Frost is about to turn on the people that is currently in the same position he is in. This is what a capitalist system does. And Carrie, my credit card interest rate is 29.9%. That's another thing. Thank you for bringing that up, Carrie. Another thing that they'll do for people who have bad credit, not saying Carrie does, but I'm just saying, one of the things is that for people who have bad credit, there are credit card companies that will offer you a credit card to help fix or improve your credit. But a lot of times those credit cards have like high ass interest rates, or they make it so that you have to put down a deposit to get the credit card. One day I'm going to do a show about secured and unsecured credit cards. I think I need to educate people about that. Okay. We are moving on to this Kirsten Sinema story. Now, we're going to do a little case study here about Kirsten Sinema. We're going to talk a little bit about her past. We're going to talk about the present, and we're going to talk about her possible future. So let's get ready to dive into it. Now, as you may have heard, Kirsten Sinema has decided to leave the Democratic Party and to fully become a registered independent. If it was someone else, I would probably say, yeah, go for it. Yeah, do the damn thing. But because it's Kirsten Sinema, for me, it's just more theatrics with this woman. I don't trust her. I remember where she came from. I see who she is now, and I think I know where she's trying to go. Now, first and foremost, I want to show you a reaction to Kirsten Sinema deciding to leave. Now, I want to go ahead and give a quick shout out here to Case Study QB. Bernie Sanders was interviewed about Kirsten Sinema leaving the Democratic Party. I want you to listen to what Bernie Sanders says because, I found some hypocrisy in his statement as well. Listen to this, and then we're going to get into this interview with Kirsten Sinema because she has decided to respond in a CNN interview. And then we're going to take a look at her past because I want to show you where she came from. Let's get into it.
You are an independent. She is now the third official independent of the U.S. Senate, joining you and Angus King of Maine. What do you think of her decision and also what you just heard in her interview with Jake?
I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on Senator Sinema. She has her reasons. Dana, I happen to suspect that it's probably a lot to do with politics back in Arizona. I think the Democrats there are not all that enthusiastic about somebody who helped sabotage some of the most important legislation that protects the interests of working families and voting rights and so forth. So I think it really has to do with her political aspirations for the future in Arizona. But for us, I think nothing much has changed in terms of the functioning of the U.S. Senate. The good news is that we now have 51 votes. We'll have a majority on committees. It means that we can go forward and start protecting the interests of working families and deal with the reality that we are increasingly living in an oligarchy where the billionaire class and large corporations control almost every aspect of our country. So I would hope very much that with this new majority, Democrats will sit down and start fighting for the needs of ordinary Americans.
So I want to talk about some of those issues in a second. But first, you were a very important figure on the campaign trail for progressives ahead of the midterms, as you normally are. I'm sure you're going to be campaigning for candidates in 2024. The outgoing Arizona Democratic Party official, one of them says that he expects Democrats will run their own candidate against her. Is that a good idea? Would you support a Democratic opponent against Senator Sinema?
I support progressive candidates all over this country, people who have the guts to take on powerful special interests. I don't know what's going to be happening in Arizona. We'll see who they nominate, but certainly that's something I will take a hard look at.
Does she have the guts to take on powerful special interests?
No, she doesn't. She is a corporate Democrat who has, in fact, along with Senator Manchin, sabotaged enormously important legislation.
What I found to be interesting about that statement from Bernie Sanders, yes, Kirsten Sinema is definitely corporate to the T. We're going to get into that as well. But it was really interesting when she's asking him, does she have the guts to take on, billionaire interests, to take on those corporate donors, right? What I found to be really interesting, Bernie Sanders says, no, she doesn't. I think that's true. I don't think she does either. But at the end of the day, neither did Bernie Sanders. Because if Bernie Sanders had the guts to take on those corporate interests and those oligarchs as well, Bernie Sanders wouldn't have told you to turn around and vote for the corporate candidates that he ran against in the Democratic primary. If Bernie Sanders has the guts to tell you to take on this corporate interest, he's criticizing Kirsten Sinema for not having that, but he don't really have it either. Because at the end of the day, he told you 2 times in a row, look, I'm not going to win this thing. Turn around and vote for my candidate who supports corporate interests and who supports those oligarchs. He told you to vote for Hillary Clinton, who takes money from Goldman Sachs. He told you to vote from Joe Biden, who takes money from Big Pharma, who supports the military-industrial complex. He told you to vote for the people who do the very thing that he told you to fight against. So let's not, for Bernie, let's not just take Kirsten Sinema and put her in a category of her own here. You right over there with her, because at the end of the day, you didn't have the guts to do it either. I'm sorry, but it's just the reality of the situation. So I found that to be rather interesting. Rather interesting. Now, let's get into this interview from Kirsten Sinema, because she has decided to speak out about her decision to leave the Democratic Party. I do have to add this here. Kirsten Sinema wasn't a Democrat really to begin with. We're going to get into her history in just a second. But take a listen to this interview that she had here with CNN.
You're here to make a significant announcement.
I've registered as an Arizona independent. I know some people might be a little bit surprised by this, but actually I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, a growing number of Arizonans and people like me just don't feel like we fit neatly into one party's box or the other. And so, like many across the state and the nation, I've decided to leave that partisan process and really just focus on the work that I think matters to Arizona and to our country, which is solving problems and getting things done.
Getting things done for who, though? Because Kirsten Sinema, you know, she's a hedge fund supporter. I'm going to get into that as well. She's a hedge fund supporter. She was at the Bilderberg meeting this summer with CEOs, hedge fund managers. Why was Kirsten Sinema invited to that? She was new to the Senate. It's not like she was a legacy senator. It's not like she had been there for 5 or 10 or 15 years. But all of a sudden, she got this invite to this meeting that all these powerful people in the world attend. And she was invited to that. I talked about that story when it happened because that was something I noticed when I looked at the list of participants and I said, how the hell did Kirsten Sinema get invited to this meeting unless she's trying to support corporate donors? Now, she's saying here that, you know, she doesn't really align with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. She is an independent. So that's really interesting because I want you to remember where Kirsten Sinema came from. Kirsten Sinema was a part of the Green Party. Now, you may ask yourself, how the hell did she go from the Green Party to the Democratic Party? I believe she sincerely switched to the Democratic Party so that she had a better chance of winning. But she was never really a Democrat to begin with. And I think we all need to remember that. And we're going to take a look at that as well.
So your voting record is pretty capital D Democratic. I mean, your views are generally that of a moderate centrist Democrat. How does leaving the party change how you do your job?
Well, I don't think anything will change about how I do my job. Arizonans sent me to the United States Senate to be an independent voice for our state, and I'll continue doing that. What I think is important about this decision, and
Arizona sent her to be an independent voice for their state, but you ran as a Democrat. You guys see the problem? If they sent you there to be an independent voice, then you should have just ran as an independent.
and this move is that I'll be able to show up to work every day as an independent and not be, stuck into one party's demands of following without thinking. And as we've seen in recent years, both parties have created this kind of requirement or a pull towards the edges that you just unthinkingly support all of one party's viewpoints. It's made it difficult to find folks who are willing to work together and solve problems. Now, as you know, Jake, we've been able to do a lot of bipartisan work over the last couple of years, and I'm incredibly proud of that. And I think it's important for folks across my state and frankly across the country to say, yep, there's someone that's kind of like me, doesn't fit neatly into one box or the other, but is standing up for their values, for what they believe in.
But you already knew that. That's why you were a Green Party member. That's why you were not a Democrat. That's why you were not a Republican, because you already knew that both of those parties had particularly had party ideologies that you didn't really ascribe to, whether it was Democrat or Republican. So you already knew that, Kirsten Sinema, and then you tried to play the political game where you're like, well, if I really want to win, I'm going to have to join the Democratic Party. But you knew exactly what you were getting into when you chose to leave a third party and go into the two-party system. So I don't buy that from this woman. I think I think Kirsten Sinema is an opportunist. I would be careful of her. I think this is someone you really need to keep your eye on for the future, because I think, well, I'm going to tell you what I think later, what I think is going to happen.
Is doing it without trying to get one over on the other party or beat the other guy.
So let's talk about practically what this means, because you're the chair of at least 2 subcommittees. You're a member of a number of important committees, including Veterans Affairs.
So I wanted everybody to hear that she's the chair of a couple of committees. So she was another one, and I pointed this out about Joe Manchin as well. Regardless of them blocking legislation that could pass, right? They're still on committees. She still has committee assignments just like Joe Manchin does. And I said this before, if the Democratic Party was that frustrated with Kirsten Sinema, why hasn't she been removed from any of these committees? Same thing with Joe Manchin. They keep them on the committees. And that right there lets me know they don't really have a problem with what they're doing.
Does this mean that you're no longer going to be in those positions because you're no longer a Democrat and the Democrats control the Senate?
Well, I intend to maintain my position on my committees and keep doing the work that I've been doing for Arizona. So I don't think that things will change in terms of how I operate or the work that I do in the United States Senate.
So ever since Raphael Warnock, Senator Warnock, was reelected earlier this week, the balance of power right now is 51 Democrats, or 51 votes for the Democratic Party. That includes 2 independents, Angus King of Maine and Bernie Sanders of Vermont. But that's 51-49. What you're doing today doesn't change that? It's still basically going to be 51-49?
Well, I know you have to ask that question, Jake, but that's kind of a DC thing to worry about. What I'm really focused on is just making sure that I'm doing what I think comports with my values and the values of Arizonans. So when I come to work each day, it'll be the same. I'm going to still come to work and hopefully serve on the same committees I've been serving on and continue to work well with my colleagues of both political parties. And I'm not really spending much time worrying about what the mechanics look like for Washington, D.C. And to be honest, Jake, I don't think anyone in Arizona is caring about that either. So I don't think
that should be a big red flag to anyone listening. She's letting you know she's not thinking about that. She's not thinking about whether or not legislation is going to pass or that Democrats put forward is going to pass or not. She's not thinking about that. She just told you.
things will change much for me, and I don't think things will change much for Arizonans.
It's also an unusual time because the Democrats in Washington feel really good right now. They actually picked up a Senate seat and picked up some governor seats. It's the first time the party that controls the White House actually gained Senate and governor seats since 1934. The wave that was supposed to come, the red wave, didn't actually happen. Kevin McCarthy, or the Republicans, maybe Kevin McCarthy will be the speaker, but either way, the Republicans will control the House, but not with the margins they were expecting. This is going to disappoint a lot of Democrats, and they're also going to feel like they don't understand. Why would you do this at a time when the Democratic Party is having a good week?
Well, I think folks...
Because she's not about that life. She is not about that life.
Folks at home in Arizona have known me for a very long time, and they know who I am. I've always been someone who is focused on getting results, getting things done, and I've never fit neatly into any party box. I've never really tried. I don't want to, and I think that's reflective of how most Arizonans live. You know, Arizonans who aren't affiliated with either party are often the largest group of voters in Arizona, and even those who are affiliated with parties often find that they don't fit 100% into that box. The reality is that when we get up in the morning, we don't really think about partisanship. Most people don't wake up and think, okay, well, I've got to get this Democratic breakfast on the table. I got to get in my Republican car and go to work. That's not how real life is. I know it is in this town.
People think about their wages, though. People think about, especially those making minimum wage that are still making $7.25 an hour. People get up in the morning and they think about that, and you voted against the minimum wage increase.
But in the rest of the country, people are just living their lives. And so they're not thinking about who's winning and who's losing. But that's what the parties are thinking about, is how do we get one over on this guy? How do we, ensure that we're punishing them? How do we continue to win? And what I'm really focused on, and I think the proof is in the pudding of the work I've done in the Senate. I'm really focused on getting results, like actually solving problems. And so, removing myself from the partisan structure, not only is it true to who I am and how I operate, I also think it'll provide a place of belonging for many folks across the state and the country who also are tired of the partisanship.
We need to be very careful here, because let me tell you what I predict is going to happen. You guys know I'm 100% for third parties and independent candidates, but not this one. Let me tell you what I think is happening. We need to be careful. You see, Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they know the majority of Americans want a third party. They've seen those polls just like we've seen those polls. What I see happening, it seems like people like Kirsten Sinema, if we're not careful, and Tulsi Gabbard, leaving the Democratic Party. Again, like I said, both parties are crap. But these are not the people that I want as a third party candidate or independent candidate. I don't want a Kirsten Sinema who is still taking corporate money. I don't want a third party or independent candidate that is not going to support progressive issues, that is not going to be willing to increase the minimum wage. I don't want that. I don't want a third party or independent candidate that is not going to support some type of universal health care in this country. I don't want that. So if we're not careful, what we're going to end up with is a bunch of centrist, independent, and third party candidates who are going to somehow manage to convince people that, look, guys, I'm not a part of the duopoly. The majority of you want a third party or independent candidate. That's what I'm here for. And I'm afraid that some people will fall for it and believe it and think, yay, this is exactly what we want. And they won't pay attention to the positions or the policies. And they'll just think, this is our new third party. This is the way to go. And you'll end up getting the same old, because all you're doing is voting for centrist candidates who were already a part of the duopoly and don't intend to make any type of progressive change. So keep your eye on people like Kirsten Sinema. Keep your eye on people like Tulsi Gabbard. This is why when I had that discussion with Andrew Yang, I told him, we don't want a third party candidate or independent candidate that's just going to be a centrist. We already have that in the duopoly. That's not what we're looking for. And I honestly believe that someone like her and Tulsi Gabbard, this is exactly what they're trying to do. So I'll be very careful. Be very careful with this. We're going to go just a little bit more, and then I'm going to show you something about her past that I think is important.
There's going to be a lot of noise about this from the Democrats, from progressives, from the left. You know this, that because of your position working with Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia to push back on some of the efforts, the legislative efforts, and change them and moderate them, you've already been a target of the left, and people have been very critical of you. They're going to call you every name in the book after this comes out. They're going to call you a traitor. They're going to call you an ingrate. What are you going to say?
Well, I think I'll do what I always do, Jake, which is keep doing the work that I know is important for my state. I just not worried about folks who may not like this approach. What I am worried about is continuing to do what's right for my state.
Anybody in the chat in Arizona? If you're in the chat and you're in Arizona, please let me know. Is this what you guys want? Is this really what you guys want? What Kirsten Sinema is advocating for? Let's take a look back. She just told you, by the way, she doesn't care. She's not worried about what other people, she don't care. Sinema looking out for Sinema. Now, why is this important? I think we need to go back and take a look at Kirsten Sinema's past, because I told you she came from the Green Party. She left the Green Party and went into the Democratic Party because it gave her a better chance to win. Mike said, hell no. There you go. Hell no. But did you know that Kirsten Sinema grew up poor? Kirsten Sinema grew up poor. She knows what it's like to struggle, growing up in poverty. But she's another example of someone. I told you that just because someone grew up poor, once they get some money, that doesn't mean they still want to help out poor people. And she's a perfect example of that. Let's take a look at who Kirsten Sinema was. There's some red flags I think we should have noticed early on.
Agree. She worked as a criminal defense attorney and, among other clients, represented an Iraqi refugee who waited for citizenship papers for over 2 years. Representing those on the margins of society would end up being the key driver for her early political career. When George W. Bush took office and U.S. imperialism thrived, Sinema stood out in the red state by protesting the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. She organized 15 anti-war rallies by the start of the Iraq War. And then her political journey began. In 2000.
Pause. She was an anti-war activist. What happened to that? Not that way anymore. Now it goes into the piece here where she started to work for Ralph Nader.
Afghanistan and Iraq. She organized 15 anti-war rallies by the start of the Iraq War. And then her political journey began. In 2000, Sinema worked on Ralph Nader's Green Party presidential bid before embarking on her own political journey. In 2001 and 2002, Sinema ran for local offices as an independent. She refused to take campaign contributions. I don't believe in accepting money in exchange for votes. That's bribery.
I don't believe in accepting money in exchange for votes. That's bribery. Well, she sure is accepting a hell of a lot of money now. Someone take a screenshot of that. We're going to ask, what happened to Kirsten Sinema?
She told the Arizona Republic. She lost both races and then attacked capitalism in a letter. Until the average American realizes that capitalism damages their livelihood while augmenting the livelihoods of the wealthy, the almighty dollar will continue to rule, she wrote.
She was against capitalism. Do you guys see how far this woman has fallen?
Later, Sinema, the proud owner of more than 100 pairs of shoes, would call herself a Prada socialist. After losing 2 races as an independent, Sinema switched over to the Democratic side and won a House seat representing Arizona's 15th congressional district.
In the grand scheme of compromises, it's not really that big a deal.
Bronco Marchetich, a staff writer at Jacobin magazine, told us.
But what I do find interesting about it, it's like one very tiny step in what would become a series of much bigger kind of leaps to the center after that.
On social issues, Sinema was a glimmer of hope for marginalized folks living in Arizona. She fought against the same-sex marriage ban. She fought for the rights of immigrants. She spoke out about mass incarceration. She fought to include gender identity in anti-discrimination laws. She led a successful effort to kill a ban on affirmative action, and she strongly opposed abortion restrictions.
In Arizona, actually, it's not that easy to be a progressive state legislator because we have a very conservative legislature and
Oh, she was a progressive state legislature. You guys hear that? She was a progressive.
now we have a pretty conservative governor coming in. But I think frankly, the knowledge that if I weren't there fighting, that I'm not sure someone else would be saying those things. That keeps me going and helps me feel like I'm making a difference for the communities that have historically been underserved and marginalized in Arizona.
But somewhere along the way, Sinema seemingly looked at the path of least resistance, taking into account the fact that Arizona had voted for a Democrat president only one time between 1952 and 2016. And it's in this context that her progressive roots seemed to fall by the wayside. One of the earliest indicators of her gradual move to the right came in the form of a book she wrote in 2009 called Unite and Conquer, Marchetich told us.
It basically is about how people can cross the aisle and you can work with people to get things done across the aisle. That's sort of the big mark of when she self-consciously rebranded. It's politics. You, of course, have to work with people to get things done. But the thing is, there's a lot of politicians who do that, but don't sort of make a brand out of that.
In 2010, Sinema was elected to the Arizona Senate, and in 2012, she decided to run for a U.S. House seat.
Congress does nothing, or worse, bails out Wall Street and the powerful while we suffer. That's why I'm announcing today that I'm running for Congress. I'll stand up to the powerful in Washington.
Sinema won the race, which made her the first ever openly bisexual member of Congress. But once she got to Washington, her words about making Wall Street pay had seemingly been lost in transit, as her
Does that sound familiar? Once she got to DC, her words about making Wall Street pay, it went away. It went away.
brand was about to take center stage. Sinema immediately went to work helping corporate lobbyists in Wall Street, two groups who were further marginalizing the marginalized communities she claimed she got into politics to protect.
She went on to help corporate Wall Street. Again, she grew up poor. This is how quickly people change when they get to DC. You see why you can't go into the two parties?
Ideological shift persisted as she advanced in political office. She advocated for cutting corporate taxes and regulations, and she approved a partial rollback of the 2010 financial overhaul known as Dodd-Frank. One bill supported by Sinema was literally written by Wall Street. The New York Times expands, in a sign of Wall Street's resurgent influence in Washington, Citigroup's recommendations were reflected in more than 70 lines of the House Committee's 85-line bill. Two crucial paragraphs, prepared by Citigroup in conjunction with other Wall Street banks, were copied nearly word for word. Lawmakers changed two words to make them plural. In 2015, Sinema, the former anti-war activist, bafflingly voted against the Iran nuclear deal, an arms control agreement that even the Pope backed. But that didn't mean much to Sinema, who said, "Yeah, I don't know him." That same year, Sinema voted to prevent the resettlement of Syrian and Iraqi refugees until tighter vetting processes were implemented. And Sinema's departure from everything she once stood for persisted. The Phoenix New Times notes, she introduced legislation aimed at cracking down on the U.S. visa waiver program and was one of only 6 Democrats to vote to punish sanctuary cities.
She, at this point, went against almost everything that she stood for when she was in the House in Arizona. Just like that. Just like that. Went against immigration, was no longer anti-war, apparently, was no longer against corporate money, apparently. She went against all of it.
And she joined Republicans in passing bills intended to deregulate the banking industry and attack the Affordable Care Act's employer mandate. Sinema also voted in favor of the Make America Secure Appropriations Act, which included $1.6 billion in funding for the border wall. With Trump in office, Sinema voted in line with the stake man half of the time, according to 538. In 2018, Sinema decided to run for Senate. In the midst of her campaign, she once again went to bat for those who needed it most, Wall Street bankers. She voted to support the Crapo banking bill, co-authored by Senate Banking Committee Chair Mike Crapo. The bill undercut regulations and weakened consumer protections, including against discrimination. The New York Times said the bill removes protections for 25 of the top 38 banks, weakens regulations on the biggest players, and encourages them to manipulate regulations for their benefit, and saps consumer protections. With Sinema's help, the bill was signed into law. So why did Sinema, the one-time grassroots progressive activist who vowed to take on the wealthy, instead choose to protect them? The source of her campaign funds could provide a clue. She was one of the largest recipients of campaign money from the banking and finance sectors.
From the banking and finance sectors. That's going to be important when I show you this Bilderberg list. That's going to be important. Remember, banking and finance.
2011 to 2020, Sinema has received over $1.9 million from the securities and investment sector and $422,000 from the commercial banking industry, or contributions she once referred to as bribery just years prior. During her Senate campaign, Sinema raised over $22 million from various PACs, big tech companies, and deep-pocketed donors.
And over the years, I'm proud to say that I have taken the time to learn and grow and occasionally even change my opinion.
Sinema edged out Martha McSally in the U.S. Senate race and was sworn in on January 3, 2019. In the summer of 2020, Sinema's work alongside Republicans did not go unnoticed. She received awards from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for her exemplary leadership and bipartisanship. After Joe Biden took office and the Democrats and Republicans split a 50-50 Senate, Sinema made a move that would have seemingly disappointed her past progressive self very, very much. Sinema, who once doggedly fought for immigrants and refugees as a social worker and attorney, chose to side with Republicans in voting to block undocumented immigrants from receiving stimulus checks.
How do you go from being a social worker to a complete corporate sellout.
And when it came to including the $15 minimum wage in the $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package, Sinema told Politico, the minimum wage provision is not appropriate for the reconciliation process. It is not a budget item, and it shouldn't be in there. While Sinema deemed inclusion of the $15 minimum wage in the reconciliation process, which allows passage with 51 votes, or 50 and a tiebreaker from the vice president, inappropriate, she also doesn't believe in ending the filibuster, which calls for 60 votes in order to pass, requiring the support from at least 10 Republicans. Meaning, she seemingly doesn't support increasing minimum wages unless at least 10 Republicans sign on too. So with that, she walked into the Senate chamber, literally gave Mitch McConnell, the self-described Grim Reaper, a pat on the back, and gleefully voted against a livable wage. The move was somewhat surprising, considering Sinema's stance on the minimum wage in 2014, when she tweeted, "A full-time minimum wage earner makes less than $16K a year. This one's a no-brainer. Tell Congress to hashtag raise the wage."
That was 2014 when she tweeted that, you guys.
Had she stuck by this sentiment, a majority of her state would have given her a pat on the back. According to one poll, 61% of Arizonans support raising the minimum wage, and had it advanced, roughly 839,000 workers in Sinema State would have seen a boost in pay.
So the majority of Arizonans, or Arizonians, I don't know what you call you guys, supported the $15 minimum wage increase, which she voted against. But in the interview I just showed you with her and Jake Tapper, she said she's focused on helping Arizonans, helping the people in her state. But if she was really focused on helping the people in her state, she wouldn't have voted against that $15 minimum wage. That's her corporate donors speaking into her ear, telling her to vote it down because they don't want to pay more to the American people. That is what that is about. Kirsten Sinema is a fraud. She is bought and paid for. And I don't want you guys to buy this independent title that she now has. This woman sold out many years ago.
Folks know in Arizona, I'll always put their interests first, never party.
I realized, if I do this thing where I'm constantly geofecting to the right, and I'm touting myself as someone who gets things done, as someone who's moderate, that's worked for me so far, so I'm going to keep doing it, and it did work for her. And there's really no incentive beyond her own political convictions, if she even has any anymore, to abandon that.
Sinema's political transformation may be complete. She's been able to advance her political career through gravitating towards positions that are important to the American people and crossing party lines in a way that is rarely seen in Washington.
Told you we were doing a little case study into Kirsten Sinema tonight. So what happened to Kirsten Sinema? And it's people like Kirsten Sinema, it's people like members of the squad that disappoint a lot of people today to the point where don't ask me to vote for Democrats or Republicans. Don't ask me to vote for anybody going into the two-party system. Don't ask me to do that. Because she's a perfect example, someone who had these progressive policies and ideas and supported these policies. And once she got into DC, she flipped. Sinema sold out for money. So much to the point that she was invited to the Bilderberg meeting. Now, this was June of this year. Now, I went over this story on my show when it happened, but it was really interesting to me when I started going through the names. And I thought, oh, okay, let's see who's here. CEO of OpenL. Who else do we have? Chairman of Goldman Sachs. Like, this all makes sense to me. The CEO of Shell. That makes sense. But as you scroll down, then all of a sudden I got to the S's and I said to myself, now, why in the hell is Kirsten Sinema at the Bilderberg meeting? This is a meeting with people who are wealthy elites all over the world. You have the director of the National Security Council, Peter Thiel, was there, who's the president of Thiel Capital, LLC. Why would she be there? Why would she be there if she wasn't supporting corporate interest? So what you saw tonight has been the transformation of Kirsten Sinema. That's what you saw tonight. I'm going to go to some of these comments here in the chat. Bad cookies. Sabby, Kirsten Sinema was the original identity politics candidate. She used her LGBTQ background to virtue signal. This was back when it was nuanced and not the DNC playbook. Lawrence, Sinema has no loyalty to any party. She has changed parties many times. Carl says Sinema is a registered corporate cash vacuum cleaner. Sebastian, I can't stand any of these politicians' voices. They're all fake. The Gemin, Sabby, do you think you could interview her? Would you? I don't think she would come on here. I don't think she would come on here. I don't even think I would want to interview her, to be honest. Like, that woman is so fake. Hitflix, she grew up poor and decided she was never going back and would do whatever it took. Rick says, watch Yang embrace her doing this. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. I'll take those comments on Rockfin. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. That's the beauty of indie candidates, Sab. They don't fall under an ideology because they are not a party. Forcing voters to educate themselves upon the candidate instead of assuming and being lazy when it comes to research, projecting our beliefs onto a candidate due to an alphabet next to your name. No one ideology that rules us all. Figuring us out, you're better off trying to lasso the wind. Research your politicians. Well said, Roger. Well said. All right. We're going to get into part 3 of the Twitter files. So let's go ahead and buckle up for that. If you need to grab like a snack or you need to grab a drink or some tea, let's do it. Now, we've gone through part 1 and part 2 of the Twitter files from Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss. Matt Taibbi has released part 3. This gets into Donald Trump a little bit here. But before we get into that, and I've read through the whole thread, before we get into that, I just want to remind you of something that happened with the previous owner of Twitter, Jack Dorsey. Now, this was an interview that he had with the Today Show. And this is Jack Dorsey being questioned about the fact whether or not Twitter is actually censoring people. Listen to his response. I think you guys will get a kick out of this.
They would like you asked. There was an enormous outpouring of questions about censorship. So let me ask you point blank. Does Twitter censor the content of its users? Does it hide what it would consider inflammatory comments, whether they be social or political?
Absolutely not. Twitter's always been about controls. People can follow whoever they want. And it's our job to make sure they see the most important things and the things that will matter to them.
So anybody can say anything on Twitter? The company does not go in there and take certain things out that can be dangerous?
Well, there's certainly tweets that promote violence, which is against our terms of service, and people have controls to block and people have controls to mute.
But what about the company? Who decides the difference between criticism and hate?
These are the individuals. So you can follow who you want, and if it's something you want to see, you continue to follow it.
Do you get trolled? Do you?
I think we all know today that that is no longer true. Oh, yes. Eric says, oh, the old days. Yeah, definitely no longer true. And so now we are getting into part 3 of the Twitter files here. So Matt Taibbi is at it again. And I think there's a 5th part that just came out. Guys, I'm trying to go through them in a little bit more detail. So I don't like to just be like, hey, let's do part 4, part 5. Like, I like to read through it first and then go through it. So here's part 3. This is from Matt Taibbi thread, the Twitter files, the removal of Donald Trump. Part 1, October 20th and January. So here we go. The world knows how much of this story and what happened between riots at the Capitol and the removal of President Trump from Twitter on January 8th. We'll show you what hasn't been revealed, the erosion of standards within the company in months before J6, decisions by high-ranking executives to violate their own policies, and more against the backdrop of ongoing documented interaction with federal agencies. Let's get to it. Let me go back here. I think I have to. Whatever your opinion on the decision to remove him that day, the internal communications at Twitter between January 6th and 8th have a clear historical import. Even Twitter employees understood in the moment it was a landmark moment in the annals of speech. And here's an example here. Is this the first sitting head of state to ever be suspended? So I like the fact that they included screenshots as well. As soon as they finished banning Trump, Twitter execs started processing new power. They prepared to ban future presidents and White Houses, perhaps even Joe Biden. The new administration says one exec will not be suspended by Twitter unless absolutely necessary. And so he gives an example here. If it is clear that another account is being used for the purposes of evading a ban, it is also subject to suspension. And it goes on here to discuss what they would do also in reference to government accounts in the future. He goes on to say Twitter execs removed Trump in part over what one executive called the context surrounding actions by Trump and supporters over the course of the election and, frankly, the last 4+ years. In the end, they looked at a broad picture, but that approach can cut both ways. So he gives another example here from Vijaya, and we've already talked about him for part 2 and part 1. I'm not going to read through everything, guys, because it is rather lengthy here. The bulk of the internal debate leading to Trump's ban took place in those 3 days. However, the intellectual framework was laid in the months preceding the Capitol riots. Did you guys hear that piece? The intellectual framework was laid in the months before the riots. So it was already set in motion what they were going to do. They were already planning to do. Do you guys get that picture? They say that the reason that he was removed was because of what happened in January. I have to be careful how I say it on here. Because of what happened in January, they said that's why he was going to be removed. But what Matt Taibbi has discovered from those Twitter files is that the framework for that was already set before January. So here we go. Before J6, Twitter was a unique mix of automated rules-based enforcement and more subjective moderation by senior executives. As Barry Weiss reported, the firm had a vast array of tools for manipulating visibility, most of all which were thrown at Trump. Again, this was before J6. So this is the piece we have to pay close attention to. As the election approached, senior executives, perhaps under pressure from federal agencies with whom they met more as time progressed, increasingly struggled with the rules and began to speak of bios as pretext to do what they'd likely have done anyway. After J6, internal slack showed Twitter executives getting kicked out of intensified relationships with federal agencies. Here's trust and safety head Yoel Roth lamenting a lack of generic enough calendar descriptions to concealing his very interesting meeting with partners. So basically what he did, he was actually meeting with federal agencies, but on his calendar, I'm presuming his work calendar, instead of actually having that meeting as meeting with so-and-so, it was a generic description. So it could have said something like one-on-one meeting, or I've done this before too when I was at work, when I didn't want people to know who I was meeting with. I've done that before where I would just put like one-on-one or group meeting and not put that person's name. So there's an example here. Yo Roth is saying, I'm a big believer in calendar transparency, but I reached a certain point where my meetings became very interesting to people and they weren't meeting names generic enough to cover. So this sounds like the excuse here. Very boring business meeting that is definitely not about Trump. You guys see this? Pretty much. Definitely not meeting with the FBI, I swear. LMAO. Okay. These initial reports are based on searches for docs linked to prominent executives whose names are already public. They included Roth, former Trust of Policy Chief Vijaya God, and recently Plank walked Deputy General Counsel and former top FBI lawyer Jim Baker. Let me go back here. Yep. Sometimes I have to go back when it's the thread. All right, let's fast forward here. On October 8th, 2020, executives opened a channel called US 2020 Enforcement. Through J6, this would be home for discussions about election removals, especially ones that involved high-profile accounts. So you see, they had already met about this in October. They were already planning to do it, you guys. And then here's the description of that here. I'm not reading all that, you guys. There was at least some tension between safety operations, a larger department whose staffers used a more rules-based process for addressing issues like porn scams and threats, and a smaller, more powerful cadre of senior policy execs like Roth and God. I'm not sure if it's God or Gade. Sorry about that. Moving on here. The latter group were a high-speed Supreme Court of moderation, issuing content rulings on the fly, often in minutes and based on guesses, gut calls, even Google searches, even in cases involving the president. So you can see here's an example here. Hi, everyone. Received this escalation just now. So you see, October 9th, 2020, that was one that they wanted to remove. They go into discussion here and say a blank election, I can't say this, election would be enough to be in violation, right? Question mark. If the claim of fact were inaccurate, yes. But it looks like that's true. And then he goes on here and shows the issues here that people had in Ohio. Again, I got to be careful what I say here. During this time, executives were also clearly liaising with federal enforcement and intelligence agencies about moderation of election content. While we're still at the start of reviewing Twitter files, we're finding out more about these interactions every day. Policy Director Nick Pickles is asked if they should say Twitter detects misinfo through ML, human review, or partnerships with outside experts. The employee asked, I know that's been a slippery process. Not sure if you want our public explanation to hang on to that. And he gives examples there. Now I'm going to fast forward here because, like I said, it's very long. Whoops. Sorry, I have to go back here. Let me fast forward just a little bit because, like I said, this is long. Here we go. Here, the FBI sends reports about a pair of tweets, the second of which involves former Tippecanoe County, Indiana counselor and Republican named John Basham, claiming between 2% and 25% of, let me just highlight this here, are being rejected for errors. So you see this, you guys? Now that report came from the FBI. Again, things that we were not privy to. The FBI's second report concerned this tweet by John Basham. And this is what John said here. He was talking about incomplete. You guys see this picture? how some of these were incomplete, rejected for errors. So this is terrible. The FBI flagged the tweet, then got circulated in the enforcement Slack. Twitter cited PolitiFact to say the first story was proven to be false, then noted the second was already deemed no VO on numerous occasions. So, long story short, this information was kept from us, and that was on purpose. Twitter was involved. Twitter was trying to make sure that this information was covered up. I don't know about Facebook, but this is what they're pulling out. Now, again, I have to be careful how I say it on here, but this is exactly what Matt Taibbi and them have found, that Twitter was very much involved. Couple more I want to show you here. Again, I don't want to go on too long. Because this one is like really, really long, you guys. Examining the entire enforcement on Slack, we didn't see one reference to moderation requests from the Trump campaign, the Trump White House, or Republicans generally. We looked. They may exist. We were told they do. However, they were absent here. So that's important to note as well. He goes on to say, this inspires a long Slack thread that reads like Titania McGath parody. I agree it's a joke, concedes a Twitter employee, but he's also literally admitting in a tweet a crime. The group declares Huck's an edge case, and though one notes we don't make exceptions for jokes or satire, they ultimately decide to leave him be because we've poked enough bears. Now, he goes on to say, could still mislead people. The humor-averse group declares before moving on from Huckabee. So they even went after Mike. Oh, God, that's small. They even went after Mike Huckabee tweet status as well. What was that politics talk about? They need to investigate Facebook as well. I agree. So there's more information there. And he says Roth suggests moderation, even this absurd case could depend on whether or not the joke results in confusion. This is seemingly silly case actually foreshadows serious later issues. Now, this part I do want to mention. Yeah, I could see us taking action under misleading claims that cause confusion about the established laws, regulations, procedures, and methods of a civic process, but it's not one that could really label in a useful way. So it's removal or nothing. I'm maybe inclined to not remove without a report from voting authorities, given it's been a while since he tweeted it. And virtually all of the replies I'm seeing are critical counter speech. So you see, this is when they were contemplating whether or not they wanted to remove him. But he seemed to be okay with it because he was getting counter speech. And that too says something else about Twitter. If you tweet something that may be somewhat controversial and you're getting counter speech, then they're less likely to come after you, it seems. So that's important to note as well. In another example, Twitter employees prepared to slap a mail-in voting is safe warning label on a Trump tweet about a postal screw-up in Ohio before realizing the events took place, which meant the tweet was factually accurate. Listen to this. So this is that tweet here, and you can see what he says right there. But then, I mean, not make that bigger. Then here it says, you can see them discussing here. They mentioned that Trump posted these two tweets. And then they go on to say, about the labeling. Learn how voting by mail is safe and secure. Not sure what the process is for GET. Are we expected to do the policy comms write up for this? It goes on to say, I've been on PTO, so I'm not 100% up to speed. My understanding in both cases is that the events took place and that the commentary by the POTUS is his opinion related to real events so that there wouldn't be any labeling, action, or violation on our side. Yeah, those are factually accurate. Thanks for clarifying. And it goes on and on. I could be here all night going through this whole list. The point that they're trying to make here, and this is important, is that they had already decided to remove him before the events that happened in January. Does everybody understand that? That part is important. They had already decided to remove him before the events took place in January. This is what was happening behind the scenes. Now, I don't like Trump. I don't really care about Trump per se. But what I will say is it makes you wonder, who else have they done this to? What's really going on behind the scenes here? And last but not least, you'll see this commentary here from James Wood. Twitter is suppressing this tweet by the president. Here is a screen grab. And you'll see here, it says some or all of the content shared in this tweet is disputed and might be misleading in how to participate in civic process. So they put a disclaimer on it. And then there's a disclaimer here. Learn how voting by mail is safe and secure. Now, James Wood was able to get a screenshot of it. So long story short, once again, yes, they were suppressing certain content. They were suppressing certain people. They were suppressing people like Donald Trump. And I don't care what Elon Musk says. They were also suppressing leftists as well. And people were anti-war voices as well. It was not just conservatives that they were suppressing. I talked about this with part 2 that came out. But what you need to take from this is that they were already planning to remove him before January. It's a long thread. Follow Matt Taibbi. You can see the whole thing. Like I'm saying, it's like 60 tweets. Or you can follow him on Substack. And he broke that down as well. Either way, Jack Dorsey has some explaining to do. Thank you for the super chat, Duncan. Yang already has praised her move to independent. Ay. Telling you, man, I'm telling you. Let's go ahead and look at those poll results. I do want to see what you guys said. Should public transit be free? Whoa. All right. Should public transit be free? So if you heard that DC story, that's where this question comes from. 88% of you said yes. 7% of you said no. And 5% said not sure. Interesting. 581 votes. All right, guys, let's go ahead and hit that like button. Don't forget to do that. And also, if you live in the DC area, you need to know about this that is happening tomorrow. I promised I would shout this out. The railroad workers were here a couple of days ago for an interview. There is a rally that is happening for them tomorrow. The two biggest rail unions, SMART and BLET, are holding rallies around the country on Tuesday in DC, Denver, Galesburg, Royal Oak. Is that Royal Oak, Michigan? Michigan. Santa Fe, Cheyenne, Sparks, Nevada, Columbus, Salt Lake City, Minneapolis, and Duluth. And here's the ad for it here. Rail Labor's Workers Rally, Fight for Workers' Rights, December 13th, that's tomorrow, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, I'm assuming the biggest rally will probably be that one in DC. So if you're in that DC area and you can make it there, definitely do so. I wish I could. If I knew about this a couple days in advance, I could have I could have made it down there for this. But I am in the Boston area, so it's difficult to me to turn around and make it there tomorrow. But if you are in DC or any of the other cities that are mentioned, they give the locations for those cities where the rallies are going to be held as well. So if you can make it there, definitely try to make it. Eric, can you put the link to this tweet in the chat just in case people want to reference that flyer again? They'll be able to refer back to that. So yes, we definitely stand with the rail workers, guys. Again, here's the locations: Denver, Galesburg, Royal Oak, Michigan, Santa Fe, New Mexico, Cheyenne, Wyoming, Sparks, Nevada, Columbus, Ohio, and Salt Lake City, Utah. Let's support them, guys. Let's support them. All right. I want to give a shout out to Oz because I want to show this on here. I've been meaning to do this and I've been late with this, just like a lot of things. What else is new? But Oz over at Beauty and the Boomer, also known as Roar Independent Media, they like to give a shout out to all women in independent media, and they made a trailer here for all the women in independent media. So let's give them a shout out. So shout out to Oz for creating this. I cannot take credit for this. Here's to all of the women in independent media. Let's go. All right. Shout out to Oz and Roar Media for that. Shout out to all the women in independent media. There aren't as many of us. Some of the women that you saw are journalists. Some are commentators. Not everyone that is featured has a YouTube show, so to speak. Some are writers as well. But definitely shout out to Oz. Thank you so much for creating that. Shout out to all you guys. If you can make it to the rally tomorrow for the railroad workers, definitely be there. I wish I could. I got a lot going on tomorrow. Tomorrow night, I will be starting at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time instead of 7. I have a special guest coming on tomorrow night. You have to wait and find out who that is. Other than that, guys, you know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.